Does that footage look pretty good? Oh yeah, it was recorded on a freaking security camera. Okay, let's talk about this thing. What's up guys, Jack here with MTS, and this is the Reolink Duo. More specifically, the Reolink Duo PoE. And I have to say more specifically because there are 4 models of the Reolink Duo available. The Duo PoE, the Duo 4G, and the Duo Wi-Fi. And this guy is a bit of an interesting take on a concept that's been around for some time now. Wide angle or wide field of view cameras. Now, traditionally, a wide field of view has been achieved with a single sensor and a lens. Now, that lens would then kind of warp the image, whatever, to try and get that wider field of view. But you would lose resolution and detail as soon as you get to the edges, and you would also have a lot of warping. So Reolink decided, well, why do wide field of view with one camera and some weird lenses when we could just do it with 2 cameras in one body? And that's what we have here today. And this thing is pretty awesome. Now this guy boasts an impressive 150-degree field of view achieved with 2 4-megapixel cameras. Now as a video guy, my first thought when I saw this camera was, how are they going to align those cameras? Because thinking about 360 cameras, the biggest issue you run into is that stitch line, or where the different cameras get stitched together in the final video. Now this guy doesn't actually stitch together the video, but they've done an impressive job with aligning the lenses. You can tell that, well, it is 2 cameras, but it still looks really good. Now I mentioned that this camera wasn't stitching together the images. This guy appears to an NVR as 1 camera, but with 4 streams. You have your camera 1 low res, camera 1 high res, camera 2 low res, and camera 2 high res. And this creates my first issue that I have with the Reolink Duo, and that is for surveillance software that is licensed based per camera, such as Synology Surveillance Station. Well, I have to pay for 2 licenses to use this camera because the feeds are not stitched together as one really wide feed in the camera itself. Now, in terms of the way the camera handles both lenses, it handles it in a bit of an odd way. For my home NVR, I'm using iSpy, and so I have both cameras at the top next to each other to create that ultra-wide camera view thing to make it look nice and pretty. And so I wanted to have the left camera lens, all that information on the left side, such as overlay stuff with date and time, camera name, those things. And for the right lens, I wanted to have, well, that information further on the right. That way it's pushed to the 2 extremes of the screen. But you can't do that. When you go and change the overlay information, it changes the overlay information for both cameras, both sets of feeds. So I basically had to go in and basically just tell it to, hey, put it all in the center, except for the camera name, which I left all weird. But aside from those 2 little gripes, this thing is a pretty wicked camera. The first thing I really like about this camera is the form factor. It looks pretty nice and clean. It uses this metal piece up here, this black part, as the heat sink for all of the, processor and stuff that's happening in this camera. So this area does get pretty hot. And then you have a nice plastic white shell here at the back. And one of the things that I really like is the included arm to mount the camera uses just a standard 1/4-20 mount, and it also has a plastic little locking post so that way the camera isn't rotating freely on that mount. It keeps things nice and secure. Now, aside from just overall creating great products, one of the reasons why I keep using Reolink products, both for my own personal use and for the deployments that I do for clients, is their approach to software. Now, that's one of my biggest pet peeves when it comes to most other companies. Companies where they're like, yeah, you have to download our piece of software for your computer, our web browser plugin, our mobile app, just to use the basic functionality or just to set up the basic functionality of a product. My gimbal, when I took that out of the box, it was a paperweight until I downloaded the app and registered it for a camera stabilizer. Reolink just uses a very simple web GUI for configuring their cameras. It doesn't require any sort of software to set the IP address, any sort of plugin to view the actual camera feed, and it doesn't require the use of an app on my phone. Thank you. Why is this so hard for companies to understand? Now, along with all of that, Reolink does offer their own NVR. They also offer an app for this guy. You can use it connected to the cloud or standalone recording directly to a micro SD card. Now, one of the nice things about this camera having an SD card slot is that you can do a backup recording to the camera locally. So while you're still using it with an ONVIF system or even Reolink's own system, you can still have a recording going on in the camera itself in case your NVR fails or whatever happens. So that's a really cool thing. But they don't force you to use their app. They don't force you to use their NVR. They don't force you to do anything. They give you these options and they leave it up to you to decide how you want to use the product that you paid for. Thank you. Now, with all the talk of software options and everything out of the way, let's actually dive into the Web GUI and see what this thing can do. Now that I have the Duo plugged in, we can go ahead and log into the local Web GUI for that. So that's at 192.168.1.167. And type in our username and password. Username is admin, my password. And it's gonna bring up the left camera of the Duo first, and then over here where we can see the number 2, if we click that, that'll bring up the right camera. Now, here's one of my issues that I have with the Duo, and that's the overlays. Now, if we jump into the settings, the first thing that we have is our overlay information and camera settings. So, day-night mode, privacy mask, all that stuff, but we have our display, our watermarks, and these are a little bit tricky. So you can change the date and time position per camera. So I can say on the left camera, I can make it in the top left, and on the right camera, I can make it top right. And if I go back to the preview, we can see those changes take place. Top left, top right. But if I want to do the same thing with the name, so let's say I want to put this name at the top right, this name's also at the top right. You can't change where the name position on the camera is per camera, which is kind of annoying, because if you have something there, it just won't show up. So, bit of a little weird thing. Now, if we come into our stream settings, we can see that this camera is currently streaming at 2560 by 1440 at 25 frames per second. That's the max it can do at a max bitrate of 5120 kilobits per second. And we have our substream, so 640 by 360. That's a pretty standard resolution for a substream at 10 FPS. We can crank that up to 15 if we want, and our bit rate. We can go up to 512. Honestly, I think I'm going to do that, so I'll crank that to 512. Next, we have detection and alarm. So this alarm is triggering the ONVIF alarm, and it would also be used for recording if you're doing that locally. Because this camera has just an SD card slot where you can put a micro SD card, if you only have or need one camera, this would be a great option, because then it's one package, one Web GUI for managing, I guess, 2 cameras on like the front of your house, but all the recording can just be done on the camera itself. So this is where you would set up those detection zones, and you can do that per camera. Next, we can come into audio and light, and this thing has a pretty bright floodlight, and we'll take a look at that in just a second. And we also have our infrared lights and whether that changes based off of night mode. We also have the switch for turning on and off camera audio. Now, this is very important because depending on where you live, the laws may be different on whether or not you can record cameras with audio. Here in Missouri, we don't have really any restrictions on that. However, in a lot of areas, it can be illegal to be recording security footage that has audio. So, but we can come down into info, camera 1, that's just what I have it named. I'm just going to call it the Duo. Cool. Coming down to the record tab under surveillance, this is where we change all of the recording settings for recording locally on the camera. You can also get email alerts based off of all of these things here. FTP, so this can push to an FTP server. You can enable the siren when motion is detected. I left this off because there's no way to trigger it via ONVIF, and I wanted to enable the siren only if this was confirmed a person, not just if the camera sees motion. Because the last thing I want to do is scare somebody away who's just walking their dog. And then we have push notifications. So this is if you're using the Reolink mobile app. Then if we come into network settings, we can see all of our network information, UID, UPnP, and port settings. Then coming down to storage, we'd be able to see our SD card if we had one in the camera. And we have our system stuff for user management, time, and maintenance for firmware upgrades. We can also enable auto reboot if we want the cameras to reboot on a set schedule. You can totally do that right in here. Now that we're in Agent DVR, we can see both camera lenses side by side, and we can see that stitch line, and it's not too bad. Now keep in mind, this is not these two cameras stitched together in one video feed. This is two separate cameras. So I can full screen that one, and we can full screen the other one. Please ignore the decoder issues that I'm having. But we can see that the cameras have wildly different images. This one is tailored for the window over here. Its settings are set according to that window. And so the image looks, well, not super great. But over here, where we don't have to deal with a window, it looks a whole lot better. And so this is a really good example of a camera like this being useful. Say you have different circumstances where this side may not be great, so we can't really tune one ultra-wide camera to fit both areas. We wouldn't be able to compensate both for the window and for the indoor lighting. So with this being two separate cameras just in one body, one lens, one camera can be tuned for that window, the other camera can be tuned for inside. Something that's pretty cool. And if we go ahead and zoom in on any of these, you can zoom in over to this photo here on this table side thing, and you can see me, my sister-in-law, my brother. Come back out of this feed. We can see some stuff on the table, the flowers, papers on the tray in there. You can see my Ethernet cable going to my access point on the balcony, and a power cable for a security camera. So these guys are pretty good cameras. Thanks to this guy using a standard quarter 20 mount on either side of the camera, I'm gonna go ahead and attach it to one of my magic arms here, and we're gonna mount this to the balcony of my apartment to see what this looks like outside. This is a bit unexpected. I'm running out of space on my balcony to mount things. I realized I probably shouldn't show this on the channel, but I have the camera now mounted on the balcony, and you can see the entire outside of my apartment building. I can see the pool, I can see a number of buildings down, the entire street that I'm on. This thing is incredible. Yeah, but that's just not good enough. So you see, let's go outside, let's take the camera, let's test out the SD card recording, and go somewhere else, somewhere where I can show you the footage. So let's go. It's 96 degrees out, and I'm currently on my way to the beach with a UPS, security camera, laptop, and a bunch of other crap in the back of my car, so that way I can make a video about a security camera. I'm proud of my life choices. There were too many people at Sherman. Time to find someplace else to film. This is the little rig we got. UPS, camera on a stand, aimed at a road. Came to this closed down bank branch. Figured it wouldn't be too bad of a place to test this thing. Now that I'm back home with the footage, I've just dropped it into an After Effects timeline here. I've just aligned both of the clips side by side, and we can see that, well, it looks pretty good. You can see some color differences between the two cameras, which is to be expected because each one of them is set to auto and auto adjusting for the best settings for that camera, which can be really cool if you have like a bright side of a parking lot and a darker side, or if, say this is in the front of your house and you have a bright floodlight that turns on in your driveway when it sees motion. Well, that'll throw the side camera into color mode, and then the other side can stay in night vision mode, something like that. It's really nice to be able to have that flexibility. But we can see that the stitch is noticeable, but not terrible. I'm not losing too much information. You'd have to be basically standing sideways perfectly in the center of this thing for you to not be seen. Because if we zoom in here, you're not really losing much information as you cross the stitch line. Now, if we just watch through this footage, this is about, I'd say, 40 feet from the road. Let's take this red car, for example, and try and zoom in on his license plate. We can't really see much of a license plate. So it's not going to be great for reading license plates during the daytime, but that changes when we get the camera into night mode. Once the camera switches into IR mode and you're using the IR LEDs on the camera, well, suddenly reflective objects such as the license plates become a lot more visible because there's not a ton of extra light bleeding in, there's not a ton of extra detail for the camera to be capturing. So the license plates look a lot more visible. I can read about half of the license plates sitting out front of my apartment building at night, and that's at a greater distance than this footage. That's at about 60 feet versus about 40 feet. Now, one of the agreements that I have with my apartment complex is that if I have a camera, I can't show the footage to anybody, so I can't show it here, but I guess you're gonna have to take my word for it. It's a pretty good camera. And that brings us pretty nicely to the conclusion of this video. Now, I really like the Reolink Duo. It's an incredible camera in a unique form factor, and throughout the process of making this video, I ordered 10 of them to use for various client deployments. These things are awesome, especially for things like parking lots or the back of a building where you want to have full coverage, but it may not be as important to have, the best cameras because that area doesn't get a ton of traffic. But anyway, guys, thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and drop a like. If you really liked it and want to see more of me in your subscription feed, well, then you can go ahead and get subscribed. I'll have links down in the description to where you can buy the Reolink Duo, as well as some other Reolink cameras. I really just like Reolink cameras. They're not paying me to say any of this. This is something that I'm working on for a client project right now. All Reolink cameras, they make great stuff. But while you guys are down there, go ahead and drop a comment. Let me know where you think this camera would be useful, or if you could even use a camera like this. Are you guys on the traditional put cameras on the sides of buildings angled in? But anyway, guys, thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one.